welcome to my paint along video of this elk. This is a fun little watercolor sketch to give you an intro to the wonders of watercolor. So here we go. I'm just laying in the background of this elk, and we want the background to be cool, especially in this scene with this elk, because it has the look of cool morning, maybe evening. I'm thinking morning because I'm painting around the little spot where steam is coming out of his mouth. So you paint around that to give that a misty, kind of a smoky look even. So the background is just kind of a cool drop in of blues and a little bit of greens. So in the foreground, I'm just dropping in some yellow ochre for the grasses, and keep in mind this is wet. You put a little bit of pigment in there, but a lot of wet at this point, because the first part of your layering in watercolor is very translucent. You don't want it chalky looking. It's not like paint by number. It's very light and translucent because you can always go over it. And so I'm dropping in a little sap green in back of the yellow ochre. Keep in mind the yellow ochre is the front because it's the warmest. You want that the warm comes forward, the cool pushes back. And what I'm trying to do here is make it about this elk. The elk is the one that you want to, the part that you want to stand out the most. So I'm layering in, or just dropping in some wet color of yellow ochre of his head part. And as I'm layering that in, I'm kind of going around some little holes, little sparkly holes, if you will. I'm going, not just filling it in. I have some light that sparkles out. And so as I layer in that, I add a little ultramarine blue to make it darker with the burnt sienna, and then some of that red color to really kind of make it pop. And so that's going to dry while I'm working on something else, and then I'll come back to that in just a minute to bring out some more of the detail. So now coming back into the mane as it dries, and going around that eye, not doing a lot with the eye, just leaving some white around it at this point. And so coming into the body of the elk, I want some of that bright burnt sienna. The burnt sienna is such a great color. And the yellow ochre, where it's the warm part of the body. And again, going around the light areas. I don't just fill the whole thing in. I just leave it white in some areas. And we'll go back over it if I need to. So more burnt sienna on those legs. As it dries, it will get lighter. It doesn't stay that dark color the first time around. And that cerulean blue is what I like to drop in for the shadows on those legs. And you can always go over that cerulean blue, but then it makes a nice deep shadow. And so as that dries, I come back over with the burnt sienna over the blue. As that dries, you don't want to put that in when it's still wet. So give it some time to dry. You can be working on something else while you're waiting for it to dry. And look how dark that is. It's not a lot of pigment. I just have the blue underneath it. So the burnt sienna with that cerulean blue mixed together makes a good shadow. And then just more of that burnt sienna on the hind leg. As it's drying, you just keep adding and layering over it, but you let it dry in between. And then smooth that over with your brush just a little bit. So that hind part of the elk is going to stay white. That makes that typical of the elk. He's got that white hindquarters. So you don't do much in that part. Okay, a little bit more detail on the legs, not a whole lot. Coming back over the head part of the elk, because I've given that time to dry, now I'm going to do a little bit more detail just to make that stand out a little bit, because it's definitely the focus. The center of interest is that elk's head, and that's where you want your eye to go. So these antlers, there's just very little going on with the antlers. Don't overdo the antlers. And so I'm using an ultramarine blue mixed with some burnt sienna. Very, very light. And you want to keep a highlight on the edge so that it makes those antlers really stand out well. Less is more in the antlers, if you will. You don't want to overdo the antlers. Use the very tip of your brush. Good point on these little brushes that come with the kit. So while that's drying, going back over a few areas, and this is the glazing process. So in the background, I want it to look misty. I want it to say, oh, this is a cold, chilly morning that the elk is coming out. I can imagine that bugle sound that the elk makes. And so I'm putting just light color around the white that's coming from the kind of fog that comes from that bugly sound that the elk makes. So, but keep that color in the background very cool. I've got greens and blues mixed together and lots of water. So I'm just kind of dropping in the indication of some trees in the background, but no detail. The more detail you do in the background, the more it comes forward. And we don't want that background to come forward. We want to have an indication that there's some trees back there, but not a lot of detail, more shapes, very subtle shapes. And by doing that, that brings the elk forward, because the elk is the story. What is this elk doing? It's just sitting there and entertaining us. Anyway, so not too much detail in the back, but enough to say he's in a little forest, and enough that you want to be able to see that steam coming from his nostrils. So yeah, just a little bit of detail in the back, just to make that elk come forward. Just coming back over the body of the elk, now that that's dried, and adding a little bit more detail, not a lot, because it's a lighter color. Now going back into the grasses, while that's dry, glazing over that, putting some more detail. When I say glazing, I mean it's just another layer of color to make it stand out. So yeah, here we go. Was it fun to paint this elk? I hope so. I've got lots more you can paint, so check them out.